The Arizona sun doesn't just bleach hope, it grinds it into dust. For Abigail Thorne, that dust was all she had left. She stood on the porch of a ranch that was more bone than barn, the deed in her hand feeling less like paper and more like a tombstone. The man in her father's chair wasn't offering a hand up. He was offering a leash. Jedediah Kane promised her everything: money, safety, his name. But his smile was a trap, and as she looked past him to the jagged mountains that belonged to the Apache, she knew some traps were just graves you had to dig yourself. This is the story of how a woman offered a world she never wanted, found a love she never imagined, a love hidden in the heart of a man the world had tried to erase. The air in the Arizona Territory of 1883 had a taste to it. It was dust, scorched pine, and the smell of failure that clung to the Thorn Ranch like a shroud. Abigail gripped the porch rail, her knuckles turning white. Before her, sitting in her father's favorite chair like he owned it, was Jedediah Kane. Kane was a man made of greed and gristle. His empire was built on ruthless cattle drives and shady land deals. His face was a map of smug satisfaction, his little eyes missing nothing, especially not the way Abigail's worn-out dress pulled tight when she breathed. "It's a simple deal, Abigail," Kane's voice rumbled, grating on her nerves. He waved a fat, ring-covered finger at the parched dead land. "This place is finished. Your father, bless his sentimental heart, he can't squeeze blood from a stone. The creeks are dry, the cattle are walking skeletons, and his credit in town is worthless." Every word was a hammer blow. It was all true. She'd watched her father, a man once as strong as an oak, shrivel into a ghost. He spent his nights staring into a whiskey glass, looking for answers that weren't there. "I'm your only way out." Kane leaned forward, the leather chair groaning under his weight. "I'll eat your father's debt. I'll take this land. Elias can live out his days without a care. And you," he paused, letting the words sink in, "you will become Mrs. Jedediah Kane." The name felt like dirt in her mouth. Abigail's stomach twisted. She was 22, but she felt 100. Her dreams of love and a family had been burned away by the relentless sun and her father's growing despair. There had been other men, good men with honest smiles. Her father, in his paranoia, had chased them all away. Now only the vulture was left. "And if I say no?" she asked, her voice a ghost. Kane's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold as a winter night. "Then the bank takes everything. Your father will be a beggar, thrown off the land his own father built. You'll have nothing. You'll be a charity case, Abigail. Or worse." He stood up, his huge frame blocking the setting sun, casting a long, dark shadow that swallowed her whole. He was so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. He reached out, brushing a thumb against her cheek. His touch was damp and possessive. She flinched like he'd burned her. "You have till the end of the week," he murmured, his voice low and ugly. "Don't be a fool. There's no one else coming to save you." He tipped his hat and walked to his buggy, his boots kicking up the dust that was choking the life from her home. Abigail stood trembling on the porch, not with fear, but with a cold, hard rage. He was right. Her father was broken. Their life was ashes. She was trapped. As his buggy vanished, her eyes were drawn again to the Dragoon Mountains, jagged purple teeth biting the bleeding sky. Apache land. People in Tombstone whispered about those mountains. They spoke of savages, of ghosts. They whispered one name above all others, a name that was a curse and a legend, a warrior who refused to be broken, who haunted the canyons like a phantom. Nantan Lupan, the Gray Wolf. They said he was the last of his kind, a man whose heart was as hard as the mountain stone. Looking at those mountains, Abigail felt a strange kinship. She too was the last of her line. Kane was offering her a gilded cage. But maybe, just maybe, the freedom of the wilderness was a better way to die. Abigail found her father in the barn. The air was thick with the smell of old hay and defeat. He was staring at the empty stalls, a whiskey bottle hanging from his hand like it was part of his arm. The setting sun cut through the cracks in the walls, painting him in stripes, a prisoner in his own home. "He was here," Abigail said, her voice flat. "Jedediah Kane." Elias flinched so hard he almost dropped the bottle. He wouldn't look at her. What did he want? He slurred. What he always wants, she snapped, the rage she'd held back now boiling over. The ranch, and me. That was his price. Our salvation for my hand. Her father finally turned, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't just drunkenness. It was terror. A deep, primal fear that had nothing to do with money. It was the fear of a man staring down the barrel of a gun he thought he'd escaped long ago. You can't marry him, Abby, he whispered, his voice cracking. You just can't. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. What other choice have you left me? Why does he own you, Papa? It's more than the money, isn't it? I've seen how you look when his name comes up. You look like a man watching his own hangman build the gallows. Elias sagged against a beam and slid to the dusty floor. He knows, Abby. He knows what happened. What happened where? She demanded, kneeling in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. What are you so afraid of? His eyes, bloodshot and swimming with a decade of regret, finally focused. Crimson Creek, he choked out the name. 10 years ago. It wasn't a battle, Abby. It was a slaughter. A cold dread crawled up Abigail's spine. She'd heard the whispers. The official story was a skirmish, a necessary action against a rogue Apache band. The saloon stories told of an unprovoked attack on a peaceful camp, of women and children cut down without mercy. You were there? She whispered. He nodded, a single tear cutting a path through the grime on his cheek. I was younger then. Cain. He was the ringleader. He'd lost some cattle, and he convinced a dozen of us they were responsible. He plied us with liquor, promised us glory. We rode in at dawn. They weren't warriors, Abby. They were families. The confession poured out of him, a dam of guilt breaking after 10 long years. He spoke of the screams, the butchery. He hadn't fired a shot, he said, but he hadn't stopped it. He just stood there, paralyzed by horror and his own cowardice, while Jedediah Cain and his men did their terrible work. Cain holds it over me, Elias rasped, his body shaking. He says if I ever cross him, he'll see me swing for it. He has letters I wrote. Boasting. Oh God, Abby, boasting about it. The pieces slammed together with sickening force. Cain's power wasn't just money, it was blackmail. He held her father's life in his hands. This marriage wasn't a business deal. It was the final turn of the screw. There was a boy, Elias whispered, his eyes seeing a ghost only he could see. Maybe 12 or 13. He got away, hid in the rocks. I saw him. Our eyes met. The hatred in them. It could have burned the world down. They said he was the chief's son, the only one who escaped. Abigail's blood ran cold. Who was he? Her father looked at her, his face a mask of utter despair. They called him Nantan Lupan. The Gray Wolf, the phantom of the canyons, wasn't a story told around a campfire. He was real. He was the sole survivor of the massacre her father had helped commit. The massacre orchestrated by the man who wanted to be her husband. Nantan Lupan wasn't just a ghost, he was a consequence. A living, breathing reason for revenge. Abigail stumbled to her feet. She was trapped in a web of debt and blood. Marry the monster who ordered the slaughter, or watch her father hang for taking part in it, all while living under the shadow of a man who had every right to kill them both. She looked at her father, a pathetic, weeping man in the dust. The pity she felt was drowned by a cold, hard realization. He hadn't just failed to protect her. He had sold her, piece by piece, to keep his secret buried. And she was the final payment. She didn't run. That would have been too easy. She saddled her mare, Willow, and rode north, straight into the jagged teeth of the Dragoon Mountains. She wasn't looking for an escape. She was looking for a single moment where she could breathe. A moment where she wasn't being suffocated by her father's sins and Cain's greedy gaze. The higher she rode, the wilder the land became. This was a place that didn't care about deeds or debts. It was a place that demanded respect. And Abigail was being foolish. The sky, once a clear blue, was turning a bruised purple. The wind whispered warnings she chose to ignore. The storm broke like an ambush. The heavens ripped open, and rain came down in solid sheets, stealing her breath. The trail vanished, turning into a slick river of mud. A crack of thunder, loud as the world splitting in two, spooked Willow. The mare reared, and Abigail, her hands slick with rain, lost her grip. For one heart-stopping second, she hung between the sky and the earth. Then she was falling. Her head hit a rock with a sickening thud. The world exploded into white-hot pain. Then it all went black. She woke to a world of gray mist and silence. Her head throbbed. She tried to sit up, but a sharp, stabbing pain in her left leg threw her back to the ground. Her ankle was twisted at an impossible angle, already swollen and purple. Willow was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of pain. She was alone, injured. She was going to die here. The thought was surprisingly calm. Then a shape moved in the mist. It moved with a silent, impossible grace. Not a deer, not a coyote. It was a man. He was tall and lean, his black hair held back by a leather band. His face was all sharp angles, his skin the color of burnished copper. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were dark, intense, and held a sorrow as old as the mountains themselves. He wore buckskin leggings and carried only a knife at his belt. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Every horror story about the Apache flooded her mind. The regal calm, the potent presence. It could only be one person. Nantan Lupan, she breathed. She had ridden straight into the wolf's den. The vengeance her father had feared for a decade was here. It was standing right in front of her. She scrambled backward, her broken ankle screaming in protest. The man watched her pathetic attempt to flee without a word. Then he took a slow step forward. Abigail squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the knife. But the killing blow never came. Instead, she felt a surprisingly gentle touch. He knelt beside her, his movements precise and economical. He wasn't reaching for his knife. He was reaching for her leg. She flinched, but his grip was firm, almost clinical. His long fingers probed the swelling, his touch impossibly knowing. He looked at her then, his dark eyes holding no malice, only a deep, weary curiosity. He spoke, his voice low and raspy, as if he hadn't used it in years. "You are far from your home, white woman." It wasn't a question. He shifted his attention back to her ankle. With a swift, powerful movement that ripped a scream from her throat, he set the bone. The pain was a bolt of pure agony. And then, once again, the world went black. When she woke up, the mist was gone. Her ankle was tightly bound in a splint made from branches and strips of his own tunic. Nantan Lupin was a few feet away, building a small, smokeless fire, his back to her. The ghost of Crimson Creek, the man who had every reason in the world to leave her to the coyotes, had saved her life. He turned, his dark, fathomless eyes meeting hers. And in that moment, Abigail knew her world had just been broken and remade, and nothing would ever be the same again. The world shrank to the size of a hidden canyon. Nantan Lupin carried her there, his stride sure and steady over terrain that would have crippled a healthy man. The camp wasn't a savage's lair. It was a place of Spartan order, a lean-to built against a rock face, a few clay pots, a worn wool blanket. It was the home of a man who lived with purpose, not a beast who lived on instinct. For days she drifted in a haze of pain and fever. He tended to her with a detached efficiency that was both unnerving and comforting. He would appear with a bowl of broth or a cup of bitter tea that cooled her fever, check the splint on her ankle, and then vanish for hours, leaving her alone with the vast, intimidating silence. He rarely spoke. When she shivered, a blanket appeared. When her water was gone, it was refilled. She learned to read him in the slight narrowing of his eyes, the subtle tilt of his head. He was a man who saw everything, who moved through the world with a quiet intensity that made men like Cain seem like loud, hollow clowns. Abigail watched him. She watched him tan a deer hide with an ancient rhythmic knowledge. She watched him track the sun across the canyon wall to tell the time. He wasn't just surviving out here. He was a part of this land, as much as the rock and the eagles. As her fever broke, and the pain in her ankle faded to a dull ache, her fear began to transform into a grudging respect. Everything she'd been taught about the Apache was a lie. This silent, dignified man shattered every prejudice she'd ever held. He was the most solitary person she had ever met. Yet he didn't seem lonely. He seemed complete. One afternoon, she was carving a piece of wood with a small knife he'd given her. He returned from a hunt with two rabbits and stopped in front of her. For the first time, he started a conversation. "The carving," he said, nodding at the wood. "You make a bird." "A dove," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. "My mother said they were messengers of peace." He considered this for a long moment, his dark eyes impossible to read. "There is no peace in this land," he said, his voice flat. "Only places to hide." He was talking about himself, she knew, but he was also talking about her. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had burned in her mind for days. "My people, we—" She couldn't say it. "We murdered your family." He began to skin a rabbit, his movements fluid and precise. He didn't look at her as he spoke. "When the she-wolf is caught in a snare, the hunter can kill her or let her go. He does not ask the snare its opinion. You were caught. I saw it." It was a strange, cryptic answer, but she understood. He hadn't seen an enemy. He had seen a creature in a trap, and his instinct, despite his history, was to offer aid, not violence. The simplicity of it was staggering. In her world, every action was a transaction, a calculation of debt and gain. In his, it seemed, some things were just done because they were right. That evening, a fragile truce settled between them. They weren't friends, not yet. They were two survivors from warring worlds, brought together by a storm and a shared understanding of what it felt like to be trapped. He was the feared Apache warrior. She was the daughter of one of his family's killers. But in the quiet of his hidden canyon, they were just a man and a woman, beginning to see the person underneath the label. And something was starting to grow between them, something more dangerous than hate. As her strength returned, Abigail began to explore the canyon, testing her mended ankle. Nantan Lupon watched her, never offering help unless she truly needed it, allowing her the dignity of her own recovery. The days fell into a rhythm. He taught her his world, not with words but with actions. He showed her which plants were medicine, which tracks told the story of the night, which berries were sweet poison. He was teaching her the language of the earth itself. In return, she taught him hers. She told him stories from the books her mother used to read, tales of kings and oceans he could not imagine. She sang old sad folk songs her father had taught her in happier times. He would listen, his head tilted, his face a mask. But she knew he was absorbing every word, every note. The tension between them changed. It was no longer captor and captive. It was the charged space between a man and a woman who had seen each other's deepest vulnerabilities. She saw the profound loneliness in his solitary life. He saw the caged fire behind her civilized manners. One night, the air grew sharp with the promise of autumn. The fire crackled, painting their faces in a flickering, intimate glow. The sky was a sea of stars more brilliant than any she had ever seen. The vastness of it all seemed to strip away every lie, leaving only the raw truth. Abigail found herself talking. The words poured out of her in a hushed torrent. She spoke of her mother's death, her father's slow decay into a ghost, and the suffocating bargain offered by Jedediah Kane. "He wants to own me," she whispered, the firelight glinting in her tear-filled eyes. "To him, I'm just another piece of property. My father sees me as the price for his sins, a sacrifice. Neither of them ever asked what I wanted." A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek. "All my life, I have been a daughter, a potential wife, a commodity. I have been dutiful. I have been obedient. I have been so alone." Her voice broke on a sob that seemed to tear itself from her soul. She looked across the fire at the silent man watching her, his face a stone mask in the dancing light. "I have never known love," she cried, the words a raw, painful admission. "Only duty and fear." The silence that followed was absolute. The world seemed to hold its breath. Nantan Lupan's gaze never wavered. He had heard the truth in her words, a truth that echoed in the empty chambers of his own heart. His world had been stolen by violence. Hers had been slowly strangled by obligation. But the result was the same, a heart starved of affection. Slowly, deliberately, he rose and crossed the small space between them. He knelt before her in the dirt, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his eyes holding a universe of sorrow and understanding. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low murmur, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. It held no pity, only a profound, soul-deep empathy. Then I will give you all of mine. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a sweet lie. It was a statement of fact, as solid as the granite walls around them. It was the offering of a man who had lost everything and had found in this broken woman from his enemy's world a reason to feel again. He was offering her the fierce, undiluted love of a man with nothing left to give but the entirety of his soul. In that moment, she saw him. Not the ghost, not the warrior, just a man. A man whose capacity to love was as vast and untamed as the land he called home. And when he finally reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheek, she didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch. While a new world was being built in a hidden canyon, the old one was churning with rage. Jedediah Cain did not tolerate being denied. Abigail's disappearance wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a public insult. He stormed into the marshal's office in Tombstone, his face purple with fury. "She's been taken!" he bellowed, slamming a fist on the desk. "Abigail Thorne. It's the Apache. It has to be that phantom, Nantan Lupin." Marshal Gibson, a man unimpressed by Cain's bluster, leaned back in his chair. "You got proof of that, Jedediah? Or are you just looking for an excuse to start a war?" "Proof?" Cain sputtered. "A decent white woman vanishes into the dragoons, and you need proof? He's been haunting those hills for a decade, looking for revenge. He's taken her. We need to form a posse and hunt him down like the dog he is." Cain was a master of manipulation. He didn't wait for the law. He went to the saloons, buying whiskey and spinning a lurid tale of a helpless white flower defiled by a savage. It was an old, ugly story, and it worked. Men bored and thirsty for blood were quick to sign on. They didn't want justice, they wanted a hunt. But Cain's true motive ran deeper than a stolen bride. Nantan Lupin was the last living witness to Crimson Creek. For 10 years, he'd been a ghost story. If he was bold enough to take Abigail, he might be bold enough to talk. If the true story of that day ever came out, Cain's empire would crumble. He wasn't just hunting for Abigail. He was hunting to bury the past forever. His first stop was the Thorn Ranch. He found Elias rocking in his chair, a broken man staring at the mountains. "Your daughter's been taken, old man," Cain snarled. "That ghost finally came for his due. I'm raising a posse to get her back and finish what we started 10 years ago." Elias looked up, his eyes wide with a new terror. He had always imagined Nantan Lupin's revenge as a knife in his own back. He never imagined it would fall on his daughter. "No," Elias whispered. "You can't. You don't know him." "I know we have a savage to kill and a woman to save." Cain cut him off. "You're coming with us. You know these hills. You'll track him." It wasn't a request. Cain's eyes were a silent reminder of the letters, the secret, the hangman's noose. Trapped by his own past, Elias Thorne knew he had no choice. He would be forced to hunt the very man his sins had created, and in doing so, lead a lynch mob straight to his own daughter. In the canyon, Nantan Lupin knew they were coming. He read it in the flight of a hawk, in the unnatural silence on the wind. The white men were moving like a clumsy, angry beast. He found Abigail by the spring, her ankle now strong enough to bear her full weight. "They are coming," he said, his voice grim. "A dozen men, maybe more, led by the one you call Cain." Abigail's face went pale. Their sanctuary was about to be violated. "How do you know?" "The mountain told me," he answered simply. "They use your name as an excuse, but their goal is my death. We must leave. Go north into the Chiricahua wilderness. They will never find us there." It was the smart choice, to run, to disappear and preserve the fragile life they had just begun. But Abigail looked at him, and she saw the deep weariness in his eyes. He had been running for 10 years. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She was no longer the frightened girl who had fled into the storm. "If we run, he will never stop hunting you. And my father, he is trapped. This won't end until the truth comes out." A dangerous, terrifying idea began to form in her mind. "You said there is no peace in this land," she said, her eyes locking with his. "Maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you make." Nantan Lupin saw the fire in her eyes. She wasn't suggesting they run. She was suggesting they fight. Not with guns, but with the one weapon Cain feared more than anything: the truth. "He will not listen to reason," Nantan Lupin warned. "He comes for blood." "Then we won't give him the battle he wants," Abigail declared. "We'll give him a reckoning." Her gaze shifted from their canyon sanctuary southward, toward the dark history that bound them all. "We have to go back," she said, her voice filled with a terrible resolve. "Back to where it all began. We have to go back to Crimson Creek." Crimson Creek was a boneyard. Even after a decade, the place felt wounded. The rocks themselves seemed to hold the memory of sorrow. The cottonwood trees stood in a somber, unnatural stillness, their leaves whispering a funeral dirge on the wind. This was a place of ghosts, and it was here that Nantan Lupin set his stage. He knew every rock, every ravine, every shadow. He wasn't preparing for a battle. He was orchestrating a revelation. High above the canyon floor, hidden in a crevice, Abigail waited. A rifle lay across her lap, not for a fight, but as a symbol. She was no longer a pawn. She was a player. Below, Nantan Lupin melted into the landscape, becoming the very ghost they had claimed him to be. The posse rode into the basin in the late afternoon. The setting sun bled across the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that twisted familiar shapes into monsters. The 20 men led by Cain had started their ride with whiskey-fueled bravado. Now entering the eerie silence of the canyon, their confidence was gone. They were jumpy, their eyes darting from shadow to shadow. "He's here," Cain growled, failing to hide the tension in his own voice. "I can feel him." Beside him, Elias Thorne looked like a man riding to his own execution, his face ashen. He recognized every stone, and each one was an accuser. "Spread out," Cain commanded, his voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. "Flush him out. I want him alive. I want him to watch me take back what he stole." The men dismounted, their boots crunching loudly in the gravel. They moved forward in a loose, hesitant line. This felt less like a hunt and more like walking into a grave. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the basin, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You desecrate this ground again, Jedediah Cain." The men froze, spinning, their rifles sweeping across an empty landscape. Nantan Lupin's voice was a calm, disembodied force. "You told these men you came to rescue a woman. You told them I am a savage." The voice paused, then seemed to come from a new direction. "Ask yourselves, why does a man bring 20 rifles to rescue one woman?" A murmur of unease rippled through the posse. Cain's face twisted in rage. "Show yourself, coward! Face us like a man!" "Like you faced my father?" the voice answered, laced with cold irony. "Like you faced the women and children who died in this very creek? Was that facing them like a man, Cain?" "He's lying!" Cain roared, his composure shattering. "He's a devil!" At that moment, Abigail stepped into the open on a high ledge above them. The last rays of the sun framed her in golden light. She stood tall, her hair unbound, the rifle held loosely at her side. "He is telling the truth." Her voice, clear and strong, rang through the canyon. It was not the voice of the timid girl they knew. It was the voice of a queen. A collective gasp went through the posse. They stared, slack-jawed. She wasn't a captive. She was a force of nature. "Abigail!" Cain shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "He's bewitched you. Get away from him." "You've never wanted to save anyone but yourself, Jedediah," she called back, her gaze sweeping over the men below. "He didn't kidnap me. He saved my life. Your stories are lies built on a foundation of murder. You want the truth? Ask my father. He stands among you. He was here 10 years ago. Weren't you, Papa?" Every eye, every rifle turned to Elias Thorne. He sat frozen on his horse, trapped between Cain's murderous glare and his daughter's pleading eyes. He saw Nantan Lupin step out from behind a rock, not with a weapon raised, but with a quiet, powerful dignity. His dark eyes were fixed on Elias, not with hatred, but with a simple, silent demand for the truth. The dam of guilt and fear that had held for a decade finally burst. The faces of the dead flashed before his eyes. With a strangled cry, he slid from his horse and collapsed to his knees in the dust. "It's true," he choked out, the confession a ragged sobbing torrent. "All of it. It was a massacre. Cain lied to us. They were families. We slaughtered them." He raised his head, his face a mess of tears and dust. "I saw this man," he gestured a trembling hand toward Nantan Lupan, "as a boy, watch his whole world burn, and I did nothing. God forgive me, I stood and did nothing." The confession landed like a physical blow. The posse stared at Cain, their faces shifting from confusion to horror, then to cold disgust. He wasn't a leader. He was a monster. Realizing he was exposed, his empire of lies in ruins, Cain's mind snapped. With a primal roar, he wrenched a pistol from his holster. But he didn't aim for Nantan Lupin. He aimed for Elias Thorne, the man whose weakness had just destroyed him. Time slowed. Abigail screamed. But Nantan Lupin moved with the impossible speed of a striking hawk. A long-bladed knife appeared in his hand. There was a flash of steel in the fading light. He didn't cut flesh. His blade struck the pistol's trigger guard, the force of the blow sending the gun flying from Cain's numb fingers. The posse tensed, expecting the final, bloody act of vengeance. This was it. Justice, 10 years in the making. But Nantan Lupin just looked down at the whimpering, defeated man at his feet. The hatred that had fueled him for a decade had burned away, leaving only a vast, empty calm. Killing this shell of a man would change nothing. He straightened, turned his back on Cain in a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and faced the posse. "His justice is not mine to give," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It is for your laws. Take him." He then walked to where Elias still knelt, weeping. He looked down at the broken man who had been both his tormentor and his witness. He extended a hand. Elias stared at the outstretched hand of the man whose life he had helped destroy. Trembling, he reached up and took it. As Nantan Lupin pulled him to his feet, a decade of haunting finally came to an end. Not with a gunshot, but with a quiet, incomprehensible act of grace. The ghosts of Crimson Creek were finally at peace. The story didn't end there. It began. Jedediah Cain was taken to Tombstone, his crimes exposed by the men who had ridden with him. Elias Thorne faced his own trial, but his confession and the public testimony of the very man he had wronged earned him mercy. He lost his ranch, but he found his soul. For Abigail and Nantan Lupin, the path wasn't easy. They were a bridge between two worlds that wanted to remain separate. But their love, forged not in sweet promises, but in the crucible of survival and truth, was stronger than any hatred. They built something new, a place of peace on the edge of the wild, a testament that love isn't about finding a perfect person, but about seeing an imperfect person perfectly. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story of courage, truth, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales from the untamed frontier. Your support allows us to keep these stories alive. Click subscribe now, and we'll see you for the next one.